Welcome to Sweet Tea with the Classics, the podcast that takes classic literature and gives it a Southern twist. Join me, Sweet Tea, as we go through some old favorites in a new accent. Love and Friendship by Jane Austen. Letter the 13th. Laura in continuation. They had been gone nearly a couple of hours before either MacDonald or Graham had entertained any suspicion of the affair, and they might not even then have suspected it, but for the following accident. Sophia, happening one day to open a private drawer in MacDonald's library with one of her own keys, discovered that it was the place where he kept his papers of consequence, and amongst them some banknotes of considerable amount. This discovery she imparted to me, and having agreed together that it would be a proper treatment of so vile a wretch as MacDonald to deprive him of money, perhaps dishonestly gained, it was determined that the next time we should either of us happen to go that way, we would take one or more of the banknotes from the drawer. This well-meant plan we had often successfully put in execution, but alas, on the very day of Janetta's escape, as Sophia was majestically removing the 5th banknote from the drawer to her own purse, she was suddenly most impertinently interrupted in her employment by the entrance of MacDonald himself, in a most abrupt and precipitate manner. Sophia, who, though naturally all winning sweetness, could, when occasions demanded it, call forth the dignity of her sex, instantly put on a most forbidding look, and darting an angry frown on the undaunted culprit, demanded in a haughty tone of voice wherefore her retirement was thus insolently broken in on. The unblushing MacDonald, without even endeavouring to exculpate himself from the crime he was charged with, meanly endeavoured to reproach Sophia with ignobly defrauding him of his money. The dignity of Sophia was wounded. "Wretch!" exclaimed she, hastily replacing the banknote in the drawer, "how darest thou to accuse me of an act of which the bare idea makes me blush?" The base wretch was still unconvinced, and continued to upbraid the justly offended Sophia in such opprobrious language, that at length he so greatly provoked the gentle sweetness of her nature as to induce her to revenge herself on him by informing him of Janetta's elopement, and of the active part we had both taken in the affair. At this period of their quarrel I entered the library, and was, as you may imagine, equally offended as Sophia at the ill-grounded accusations of the malevolent and contemptible MacDonald. "Base miscreant!" cried I, "how canst thou thus undauntedly endeavour to sully the spotless reputation of such bright excellence? Why dost thou not suspect my innocence as soon?" "Be satisfied, madam," replied he, "I do suspect it, and therefore must desire that you will both leave this house in less than half an hour." "We shall go willingly," answered Sophia. "Our hearts have long detested thee, and nothing but our friendship for thy daughter could have induced us to remain so long beneath thy roof." "Your friendship for my daughter has indeed been most powerfully exerted by throwing her into the arms of an unprincipled fortune-hunter," replied he. "Yes," exclaimed I, "amidst every misfortune it will afford us some consolation to reflect that by this one act of friendship to Janetta we have amply discharged every obligation that we have received from her father." "It must indeed be a most grateful reflection to your exalted minds," said he. As soon as we had packed up our wardrobe and valuables, we left MacDonald Hall, and after having walked about a mile and a half, we sat down by the side of a clear, limpid stream to refresh our exhausted limbs. The place was suited to meditation. A grove of full-grown elms sheltered us from the east, a bed of full-grown nettles from the west. Before us ran the murmuring brook, and behind us ran the turnpike road. We were in a mood for contemplation, and in a disposition to enjoy so beautiful a spot. A mutual silence, which had for some time reigned between us, was at length broke by my exclaiming, "What a lovely scene! Alas, why are not Edward and Augustus here to enjoy its beauties with us?" "Oh, my beloved Laura," cried Sophia, "for pity's sake, forbear recalling to my remembrance the unhappy situation of my imprisoned husband. Alas, what I would not give to learn the fate of my Augustus, to know if he is still in Newgate, or if he is yet hung. But never shall I be able so far to conquer my tender sensibility as to inquire after him. Oh, do not, I beseech you, ever let me again hear you repeat his beloved name. It affects me too deeply. I cannot bear to hear him mentioned. It wounds my feelings. Excuse me, my Sophia, for having thus unwillingly offended you, replied I, and then, changing the conversation, desired her to admire the noble grandeur of the elms, which sheltered us from the eastern zephyr. Alas, my Laura, returned she, avoid so melancholy a subject, I entreat you. Do not again wound my sensibility by observations on those elms. They remind me of Augustus. He was like them, tall, majestic. He possessed that noble grandeur which you admire in them. I was silent, fearful lest I might any more unwillingly distress her by fixing on any other subject of conversation which might again remind her of Augustus. Why do you not speak, my Laura? Said she after a short pause. I cannot support this silence. You must not leave me to my own reflections. They ever recur to Augustus. What a beautiful sky, said I. How charmingly is the azure varied by those delicate streaks of white. Oh, my Laura, replied she, hastily withdrawing her eyes from a momentary glance at the sky. Do not thus distress me by calling my attention to an object which so cruelly reminds me of my Augustus's blue satin waistcoat, striped in white. In pity to your unhappy friend, avoid a subject so distressing. What could I do? The feelings of Sophia were at that time so exquisite, and the tenderness she felt for Augustus so poignant, that I had no power to start any other topic, justly fearing that it might make some unforeseen manner again awaken all her sensibility by directing her thoughts to her husband. Yet to be silent would be cruel. She had entreated me to talk. From this dilemma I was most fortunately relieved by an accident truly apropos. It was the lucky overturning of a gentleman's phaeton on the road which ran murmuring behind us. It was a most fortunate accident, as it diverted the attention of Sophia from the melancholy reflections which she had been before indulging. We instantly quitted our seats and ran to the rescue of those who, but a few moments before, had been in so elevated a situation as a fashionably high phaeton, but who were now laid low and sprawling in the dust. What an ample subject for reflection on the uncertain enjoyments of this world would not that phaeton and the life of Cardinal Wolsey afford a thinking mind, said I to Sophia, as we were hastening to the field of action. She had no time to answer me, for every thought was now engaged by the horrid spectacle before us. Two gentlemen, most elegantly attired, but weltering in their blood, was what first struck our eyes. We approached. They were Edward and Augustus. Yes, dearest Marianne, they were our husbands. Sophia shrieked and fainted on the ground. I screamed and instantly ran mad. We remained thus mutually deprived of our senses some minutes, and on regaining them, were deprived of them again. For an hour and a quarter did we continue in this unfortunate situation, Sophia fainting every moment, and I running mad as often. At length, with a groan from the hapless Edward, who alone retained any share of life, restored us to ourselves. Had we indeed before imagined that either of them lived, we should have been more sparing of our grief, but as we had supposed when we first beheld them that they were no more, we knew that nothing could remain to be done but what we were about. No sooner we therefore heard my Edward's groans than, postponing our lamentations for the present, we hastily ran to the dear youth, and, kneeling on each side of him, implored him not to die. Laura, said he, fixing his now languid eyes on me, I fear I have been overturned. I was overjoyed to find him yet sensible. Oh, tell me, Edward, said I, tell me, I beseech thee, before you die, what has befallen you since that unhappy day in which Augustus was arrested, and we were separated. I will, said he, and instantly, fetching a deep sigh, expired. Sophia immediately sank again into a swoon. My grief was more audible, My voice faltered. My eyes assumed a vacant stare. My face became as pale as death, and my senses were considerably impaired. "Talk not to me of Fatus," said I, raving in a frantic, incoherent manner. "Give me a violin. I'll play to him, and soothe him in his melancholy hours. Beware, ye gentle nymphs of Cupid's thunderbolts. Avoid the piercing shafts of Jupiter. Look at that grove of firs. I see a leg of mutton. They told me Edward was not dead, but they deceived me. They took him for a cucumber." Thus I continued, wildly exclaiming on my Edward's death. For 2 hours did I rave thus madly, and should have not left off, as I was not in the least fatigued, had not Sophia, who was just recovered from her swoon, entreated me to consider that night was now approaching, and that the damps began to fall. "And whither shall we go," said I, "to shelter us from either?" "To that white cottage," replied she, pointing to a neat building which rose up amidst a grove of elms, and which I had not before observed. I agreed, and we instantly walked to it. We knocked at the door. It was opened by an old woman. On being requested to afford us a night's lodgings, she informed us that her house was but small, that she had only 2 bedrooms, but that, however, we should be welcome to one of them. We were satisfied, and followed the good woman into the house, where we were greatly cheered by the sight of a comfortable fire. She was a widow, and had only one daughter, who was then just 17, one of the best ages, but alas, she was very plain, and her name was Bridget. Nothing, therefore, could be expected from her. She could not be supposed to possess either exalted ideas, delicate feelings, or refined sensibilities. She was nothing more than a mere good-tempered, civil, and obliging young woman, and as such we could scarcely dislike her. She was only an object of contempt. Adieu, Laura. Thank you for spending time with us at Sweet Tea with the Classics. We hope you enjoyed your visit. Like, share, and subscribe for more. And remember, when life hands you lemons, slice them up and put them in your tea.